Everybody, welcome to another episode of Bastards of Knowledge, and we hope that you have been healthy, well, and safe wherever you're in the world, in the country. Tane, welcome back, and it's nice to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you too.
Yeah, so as always, let's start off with what piece of knowledge you've put into your basket this week.
Yeah, the piece of knowledge I learned this week is talking about opportunities, and we've been talking about opportunities a lot recently. And I think I learned a new perspective this week that sometimes you can't take up every opportunity, and it can be disappointing for yourself, but sometimes you have to give up that opportunity to let others grow. And I think
Yep.
sometimes we get so focused on ourselves and, oh, I'm going to miss out on that opportunity. But if you actually give up that opportunity, not because you can't do a good job at it, but maybe just because you're doing too many other things, you're giving somebody else that opportunity to grow themselves and actually do a good job, and you can see them grow. So sometimes if you're not wanting to give that opportunity up because you're thinking about you, sometimes just think about those other people who are going to get that opportunity themselves.
And that's so true because sometimes you have to say no to get to say yes later on, and we live in a world where people say it's got to be about you, about you. But when you give up some stuff and help others, you actually grow a lot more. So that's a pretty awesome learning, and I'm sure a lot of that will come through as you go through this year. Um, my knowledge this week, I guess, and I'm pretty big about this perspective. I think I mentioned a few times, and I want to put my perspective learning in context today. So at the moment, the media is going crazy about lots of different things. We're talking about the price of fuel. It's everybody's talking about that and how crazy it is, and we talk about the vaccines and the mandates and COVID, and those are all real things. But when we stop and puts in perspective, most of us in New Zealand, this is a very general comment here, a large percentage of us in New Zealand, when we go home every night, we go home somewhere, and maybe it's warm, we have a family or a whānau, and I say that because we then think about Ukraine, things happening in Ukraine where people are, through no fault of their own, have just got to leave what they know and disappear, because of no fault of their own. So yes, it's very easy for us to complain and be caught into our world, and it is okay to be caught in our world, but perspective is always good because it's so easy to complain. But gratitude is something that I think, we need to start appreciating a bit more. But yeah, and that just came to my mind, because all that this week we've been talking about is petrol is $2.70, petrol is $2.80, petrol, but hey, at least I've got a car, at least I can go to work, I've got a public transport, those sort of things. Anyway, that's my bit of knowledge today, I guess, or my rant, I guess. And again, I know that's a very general comment, but I think a large proportion of us can. The fact that you listen to this podcast means you've got electricity or Wi-Fi. So yeah, awesome. And it's time to bring on our guest. And as always, to our listeners, we try and bring on people that Tony and I think are pretty awesome human beings because of what they've done. And once again, this week, we are no different. We'd like to welcome Andrew onto our podcast. Andrew, welcome to our podcast.
Kia ora.
Yeah, Andrew, thanks for joining us. Andrew, do you want to tell our listeners and us a bit about yourself? So let's talk about what you're doing right now and your current role before we go backwards.
Current role. So I'm working at the Otago Museum. I started at the Otago Museum a year ago as a science communicator in the science centre at the museum and in the butterfly house and the planetarium. And now I'm have graduated to a science engagement coordinator, where basically I'm developing a project for science communication, traveling around the country and sharing exciting things about space to get kids excited about science.
That's pretty cool. And for our listeners, to put this in context, Dunedin is known as a very cold place. To have a butterfly house, which is pretty hot, is like an oxymoron. You go from super cold to super tropical, which is pretty crazy. Which is one of its awesome quirks. So Andrew, that's very awesome. And having known Andrew for a while, I know this is a pretty awesome part of your career at the moment, and it's a good stepping stone. But let's talk about where it all started from, Andrew, because if I said to you when you first came to university that this is what you'd be doing, what would you have said to me?
I would have been very surprised. I don't think I would have really known what to say. I mean, to be honest, started university, I had no idea where I was going to end up. So it could have been absolutely anything, but yeah, it's
Yeah,
a pretty niche thing to be working with butterflies and flying through space in the planetarium.
exactly. And I like how you mentioned that when you came to university, you could have been anywhere, right? You could be anywhere. But when you came to university, what did you have in mind? So when you left year 13 and you're sorry, where you from? Where's home for you as well?
Hamilton. So
Um,
I did grow up in Hamilton, did primary and secondary school there, and then at the end of year 13, I was like, okay, I need to make some decisions now. Where am I going to go? And Otago wasn't actually my first option, or even my second option. Probably it was just a backup option that happened.
yeah. Yeah, and so you had these options here, and you arrived at Otago. And what were you hoping to study when you first arrived? Or what did you study actually? I guess not hoping.
So at my undergrad, I did psychology, but I started off my first couple of weeks of university taking all kinds of different papers. So I was like linguistics. Oh, try that out. Try out maths, statistics, anthropology, Māori. I was just trying to work out anything that kind of caught my eye, and psychology in particular was the one that was like, oh, I find that quite interesting. I like learning about why we think and behave the way we do, and yeah, it was really interesting.
And I love that you said that because a lot of people when they come to university or go to whatever university where it's Otago around the world, they think they have to know what they want to do. But you had a very different approach. You're like, I'm just gonna try things out. How did that sit with your peers and your family where you're like, I'm just gonna go try things out?
I mean, family wise, I think my parents are pretty happy with me just doing whatever. I think
Yeah.
at high school, I feel like I was a little bit of a I got a little bit reclusive at points. I think I probably grunted a little bit more than my parents wanted me to do. And so to see me kind of just exploring and discovering what I wanted to do, I think they were stoked for that. Peer wise, I didn't have a whole lot of peers at high school that I have kept in touch with.
Yeah.
And there were probably like two people from my entire high school that came down to Otago. And so that was it was a freeing aspect for me at least, having the ability to completely be who I not that I recreated who I was, but I could be who I was and not there was no kind of residual, oh, that's not who Andrew used to be. Andrew's this quiet, shy recluse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful because, this is across the board when young people, and myself included, when we go to university, we basically release I'm going to use the word shackles of those preconceived ideas that are created in high schools. And, when I speak to young people, and I'm sure when you speak to young people as well, you go, hey, university is a great way not to recreate yourself, but to actually just be yourself. Because when you're in a high school system, you are fitting into a system, you fit into these boxes here. When you come to university, wherever the university is in the world, you're allowed to just be, hey, this is actually who I am. This is actually who I am. If I want to grunt, I can grunt, and that's okay. So you and the other thing that really fascinates me is tell me your interest in Te Reo Māori. Was that something that you just wanted to pick up?
So when I first started university, I was interested, but it wasn't a kind of passion of mine.
Yeah.
At high school, my high school wasn't particularly great at focusing on the Reo Māori, or at least they did, but no one was really keen on it. It was only later on at university, after having that kind of grounding in first year, that I met my partner, who's Māori, and we together started off on a journey and really got into it. And I did 4 years with Te Wānanga o Aotearoa, doing the Reo Māori courses there, and it's been fantastic being able to kind of, changing my worldview really, being in those spaces. One of the awesome things about Te Wānanga o Aotearoa is getting to go along to Marae, having one day wānanga and just immersing yourself in a completely different perspective, not a different world, but a different perspective on life, which I've found fascinating.
Yeah, and that's really really powerful because perspective is really key. And like I said at the start, we all live in our worlds, and unless we can see someone else's perspective, we don't really understand. We don't fully understand how other people think or interact or why they do that. We're very quick to judge things based on our own perspective. So it's pretty awesome that you did that, especially given that Māori was not part of your heritage. And that's pretty unique because a lot of times you find it's young Maori that want to identify with the heritage, but you were like, hey, I want to get involved and see what it's all about because it is part of New Zealand, which is awesome. Then psychology. So you found your jam in psychology. And what is psychology like at university? What is it like for you?
Ooh, what is it like for me? Um, it, I mean, it's just super interesting to me. I mean, the so there's kind of two branches of psychology. I mean, there's way more than that, but in general, you can kind of go down the more neurosciencey approach, where you kind of understand the inner workings of the brain and all the different synapses and bits that are connecting to each other. I steer away from that entirely because that I have a brain and I don't need to know how it exactly works because that I just get so overwhelmed by that kind of stuff. I like the other side, which is more about the behavioral side, the thought and cognition side. And specifically, when I went on to do my postgrad research, I was looking into our memory and what we're able to remember and what kind of factors might influence our remembering. And I like that because everyone has memory. Well, almost everybody has memory, and it's very easy to understand what's going on. And you're like, oh, that's back to the taking photos or drinking alcohol or being stressed because someone's got a gun in your face. Like those are things that. I mean, hopefully you haven't experienced a gun in your face, but everyone's experienced some form of factor that's changed their memory in some way. And I just find that fascinating.
And we'll come to that later on, because that's a really fascinating area that you have studied and worked in. Again, I have to apologize to our listeners out there and to Andrew as well. When I introduced Andrew, I forgot to mention that he is Dr. Andrew.
Oh.
Andrew has a PhD. So yeah, so we are talking to someone who knows what he's talking about as well. Yes, it's Dr. Andrew Mills, by the way. I know it's pretty embarrassing, but hey, we're just going to say it. Andrew, we can see
I feel like saying that I know what I'm doing. I feel like that's a bit of a misinformation. I feel like if anything, what I've learned from doing a PhD is that I know now what I don't know. I know there's so much more. I have a niche area that I might know a little bit about, but there's so much beyond that.
And that makes me laugh because everyone goes, "Oh, you're a PhD, so you know what you're doing." You're like, actually, I know nothing. I know nothing. I think I know what I'm doing, but I can't do anything. That's all good. But I can reference. That's great. So before we talk about your postgrad, let's talk about your undergrad journey. You had opportunity. Tanya spoke about opportunities along the way. So, what kind of opportunities did you seize apart from the Te Reo Māori course that you got involved in? Again, being away from home. For our listeners who don't know New Zealand, Hamilton's in the North Island, Dunedin's in the South Island. It's a fair distance away. So, what were some of the challenges that you faced if we talk about opportunities?
I think one of the things that I thought that I might have experienced, but I didn't, was just literally coming away from Hamilton, going down to Dunedin. I thought that I'd experience some kind of homesickness and those kind of challenges, but I was surprised that I didn't. And I think it was, well, when we go back in time, if we talk about my time at high school, I had some experiences away from home, which were really, really helpful to kind of get over those challenges. But I think learning how to study and learning how to be kind of self-sufficient, not having anyone looking over my shoulder and being like, hey, why aren't you doing your homework, kind of stuff. That was one of the things that I initially was struggling with. And it was only when I found I found a tribe of people, I found a group of people that were really quite focused. And I was like, oh, okay, I have someone to kind of model my behavior after. I didn't have the scheme, or I didn't have the way of approaching the situation until I saw how other people were doing it. I was like, oh, okay, I can do that. I can head off to the library and study for the evening. It's not that hard to do. Yeah, just kind of taking those. I think I do a lot of watching how other people interact with situations, and then kind of modeling my behavior after them. Although that doesn't always work out the best way, because you have to choose the right models.
You live and learn, right? You live and learn. It sounds like you're already practicing your own psychology before you even started studying it, right?
Yes.
The whole behavior thing. You know, Andrew, what you said to me really hits home at the moment, because you spoke about, not knowing how to study. And, I think this is really an important lesson or a message, because lots of young people that I speak to say, when they come to university, they just use the old high school method of study, and they just struggle. And they find their way, as you said, they just model other people's behavior. But this year is a bit different, because of the online learning. This is what I'm seeing, that young people are finding it really hard to struggle, because they cannot model themselves, model other people. So they just stick into what they know. So hopefully, fingers crossed, and as working the field that you do, that we get back to modeling behavior. Because if you have any tips for people that are listening with online, because it is really hard. The first 3 weeks they come from young people come from the school system into this university system, which is just like WTF. And now they go, they can't follow anyone. What would you say to them? Some of your learnings, I guess, it's a hard one. I know it's a hard one.
That's a hard one. I'd say, my experience over the last couple of years in lockdowns and isolating and stuff, having when I was finishing my PhD, I needed to focus on writing. That was the kind of key thing I needed to do. And I had really bad habits of writing. That's why it took me so long to finish my PhD. But what I did was, I had a friend that was also trying to write, just writing a book. And we were like, okay, let's just dedicate a 2-hour Zoom session, and we're just going to not talk. We're just going to be in the same space virtually, and spend that time writing, like cameras off, microphone off as well if needed, and just spend that time. And then every now and then checking in with each other and be like, oh, hey, like, how's it going? Where are you up to? That was really helpful for me. But I guess that doesn't, that's a difficult one. I feel for the educators that are working through their classrooms and trying to make sure kids are getting engaged and working out what's actually done.
Maybe Tana, we can bring you in, because you are living with them right now. What are you seeing? And because you've gone through some lockdowns and you've gone through your life teaching, what would you say?
I think for me the biggest thing is just removing distractions, especially your phone. I find a lot of people, because the lecture feels a lot longer online, it's so easy to just reach out, look at your phone, do things on there, and not actually engage with the lecture. I think the lectures that are being live in terms of Zoom are working a lot better for me, because I feel like I'm actively engaged in the class. Whereas when you go to pre-recording, you can just pause it, take a break, which, yes, is beneficial in some senses, but in terms of the long run, it's not beneficial, because what I'm seeing is a lot of people will constantly pause so they can write down information, and so they're taking probably twice as long to finish a lecture. And I said that's one of the key learnings you take away in a live lecture, is you learn to filter out the information that is already on the slides or you already have knowledge of, and you actually just write down what you are learning above and beyond that. So I think the key thing for these students is learning how to minimize distractions, but also working together. They don't realize that they can watch their lectures together, and I think that's the most beneficial thing about being live and being in a real lecture, is being with other people, seeing how they're learning, seeing how they're studying, and just learning that they have to find a study schedule that fits them, because at the moment everyone's following everyone because they think, oh, they know how they're doing their study, they're doing well, I'm going to focus on that. But some of us are visual learners, some of us like to just write notes down, some of us like audio. So it's just finding your niche in this first couple of weeks before the semester rolls on.
Yeah, I think it's a real tough one, and I'm sure as the years go by, there's going to be some amazing research that pops out of this, and how young people in schools and in universities have changed a little bit, and not in a bad way. There's nothing bad here. You just change the way things go. So Andrew, we'll come back to you. We spoke about some challenges, which you mentioned, but let's focus on the opportunities, because going to university presents opportunities galore. And I know that you've taken some amazing opportunities and pretty cool things, which is how I got connected with you. What are some things opportunities that you just grabbed and you're like, oh, this is so random?
Yeah. I mean, so first year I was at St. Margaret's College, the hall in Otago. And at St. Margaret's, there were so many opportunities to just take up. So end of first year, I was like, they're asking for a student president. I'll apply for that. I'll come back to St. Margaret's for a second year. And so I just took up the president. I applied for it, did a bit of a speech, and somehow they thought that I was a worthwhile candidate. And so that was an opportunity that I was like, I would never have thought I'd be doing at high school. I never really sought for those kind of leadership positions.
Yeah.
And then beyond, so that was kind of like in my more social kind of life, but academically, I was taking up opportunities whenever there was a kind of seminars coming up or interesting courses that I were free to take. I was working over summer one year, and I was like, I could do a kickboxing class at OUSA, so the clubs and societies. So I was like, yeah, I'll join a kickboxing class, and did that. Then further on, as I got more into like postgrad stuff, I was just kind of taking on opportunities like talking about my research. People would be like, oh, hey, do you want to do a radio interview? I'm like, sure, I can do a radio interview. Or do you want to compete in a 3-minute thesis competition? We have to kind of compact everything that you did for 3 years into 3 minutes. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll try that. And it's just kind of, it's been the case where it's, basically, I mean, as Tane said, like there's opportunities to say no, and other people can take those opportunities up. And I've definitely done that because I had to be careful not to say yes too often. And that was my downfall. In second year, at least, I was saying yes to too many things. Barely got any time to do what I needed to do. But yeah, when I have the time and an opportunity arises, I love to just take hold of it and see where it takes me.
Oh, brilliant. And like you said, you got involved with tons and tons of things. Which one of those opportunities do you think was the greatest for you in terms of your own learning?
Own learning, I think the opportunity. So in 2018, so a couple of years ago, my supervisor was like, "Oh, hey, have you?" Supervisor my PhD, that is. She was like, "Oh, hey, have you thought about like maybe doing some time away overseas and studying in another lab overseas to see kind of how they do their things?" I was like, I didn't know that was a thing I could do. So I looked into it and realized that you can get funding for that kind of thing through the university. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll apply for it. And I ended up working for 6 months over in the UK at a lab with, actually 2 different labs with some of the kind of best people in the field of memory, false memory in particular, when we think we remember something, but we don't actually remember it accurately. And so I was working with these people for that time over in the UK and got to do all kinds of traveling and fun times on the side, but also just the experience of being able to work with these kind of leaders in their field was awesome.
And we're gonna. So you mentioned opportunities, and we go back to what I mentioned at the start. Perspective. How did your perspective change when you went in a different lab? What did it change?
It definitely was. Every kind of supervisor runs their lab differently, and so you have the ones over in the UK they had like one central research focus that everyone was working on. So there's a lot of collaboration. For me, my research I was working on, like basically there was no one else doing my research in my lab or anywhere else at the university. So I was quite isolated, not not in a bad way, but I didn't have the opportunities to kind of sit down and be like, oh, hey, you're doing this thing as well. Let's talk about what's going on here.
Yeah.
So that was one of the kind of challenges that I experienced as a PhD student, and yeah, having that perspective and seeing like, okay, there are different ways of doing it. And I kept in touch with a number of people to keep up those contacts, and
brilliant.
really helpful.
And that's so true. When I was doing my postgrad as well, just opportunities to have a different perspective from a different world, it just blows your mind, because I find that when you're in academia, you think your way is the only way, or you just go, this is it, and you can become pretty staunch about it. Well, at the start specifically. And then when you go, actually, this is quite a silly idea, or you have a disruptive way of thinking, you go, wait a minute, I've actually got to just have a beginner's mindset and go, right, cool. Because I think sometimes when we get into the postgrad pathway, we go, oh, I know what I'm up to, because I'm all that, I'm doing postgrad. But like I said at the start, like I said, when we mentioned PhD, you actually know nothing. You just at the start of your journey, which is very cool. So you did that there, and then you also got involved in hands-on Otago, or hands-on science, I guess, when you did. And yeah, and you've just kept coming back. How many years have you been doing that for?
So when I hadn't really thought about hands-on as being the kind of, I guess that's probably one of the opportunities that I've taken up where, so I started in 2015, was my first year as a red shirt, so a student leader.
And what year of university were you then?
That was my first year of my PhD. Okay. So I'd finished my honors degree, and I was starting into my PhD. Yeah. And it was I hadn't heard about it before. I just saw a poster on a wall saying like, "Hey, we want do you want to be a red shirt?" And I was like, well, I don't know what that is. Some kind of Star Trek thing. And then had just the best time getting to meet other people that were as excited, enthusiastic about life and science and exploring and teaching. That was just such a cool experience. So I've basically every year since then, bar this year, have had an opportunity to be in person and just get so excited about learning with students from all over the country, which it's so much fun.
Yeah, and for our listeners out there, basically what we're speaking about is a program that the university runs, where they invite at the present time 400 young people from around the country to come along and spend a week just experiencing what tertiary life is like. And these young people are between the ages of 15 and 16, and some might be 17. So basically people like Andrew facilitate this, and they run this, and they make sure these young people have a great experience. Yeah, and like you said, it is a great time, but it doesn't come without its challenges as well. But obviously, both, and Tane was also Tane is a product of that as well. So, and Tane has spoken about this many times. So, I think it's a life-changing opportunity to get involved with it. And I think also what it does is, what it has done for me is, when you feel jaded about the stuff that you do, and like you said, Andrew, you see these young people that are so aspirational, inspirational, and you go, actually, wait a minute, this is really cool. Let's get involved in it. It's just 1 week, but it's amazing week.
Definitely.
Do you want to tell us about your research? Because I think it's pretty fascinating. Yeah, maybe if you want to talk about that, so what is your research focusing on when you do your PhD, I guess?
So I started off basically in 2014. There was a paper that came out, which was talking about how taking photos ruins your memory. Was basically the tagline of the headline. And I like to take photos. I've always been quite a keen photographer. Got a camera for my 21st birthday, and I didn't stop taking photos basically until I started my PhD. And I read this paper saying, yeah, it ruins your memory. I was like, does it actually do that? And so that's basically the start of the research project. Was okay. The key thing about research is that if someone does an experiment, you can't just take that as law now. That's you have to kind of replicate it. You have to work out, does this effect occur multiple times? And so that's what we did. And right off the bat, it failed. I took people I basically did a very close replication of the original paper where they took people to a museum. So I took people to the Otago Museum who knew that I'd be working there in 4 or 5 years' time, and got them to take photos of some of the exhibits that they were interacting with, and some of them they didn't take any photos of. And then the next day we brought them back into the lab and was like, hey, what do you remember? And they remembered just as well. It didn't matter whether they'd taken photos of it or not. They were just on par. And so I was like, okay, that sucks because, well, I mean, on the one hand, I was really hoping to just replicate the original study and then go off and explore the mechanism and intricacies of that. But I finished off the first study and I was like, okay, now I have to work out what to do next because we've put that one to rest. It doesn't do anything. And so we thought about, okay, what happens? So taking photos at a museum isn't that big of a deal. Like educationally, you might not remember what you're trying to take in there,
that's
but
right,
it's not a life or death situation. And so we thought, why don't we explore life or death situations? And so we looked at people's memory for witnessing a crime, where a crime takes place and you're like, oh, people should really focus on what's happening there. So that should increase their memory and benefit their memory, and taking photos maybe in that situation will impair their memory in some way. And so we did a study where we had people taking photos of some events of a crime taking place, a guy going into a party, spiking a girl's drink and stealing a wallet, and then other people took photos of other things, and then some people didn't take photos of anything. And we wanted to compare those things. And once again, we found that taking photos did not affect people's memory. They remembered just as well. They were just as accurate. Well, I mean, everyone's accuracy in remembering is pretty low in general. So people just aren't great at remembering, and taking a photo didn't help at all. The one interesting thing that I took from that study, though, is that although you don't remember any better or worse, you're not any more accurate, you do think you're more confident. You are more confident in your memory if you've taken photos. So there might be some kind of mechanism there where you think, oh, I had my camera out at the time. I caught that on camera, and that kind of gives you this kind of mental boost. You're like, oh yeah, no, I do have a good memory, which in some contexts would be not great. So in a legal context, when a judge or a police officer asks you, like, how confident are you that you witnessed this crime and all the details you gave us were accurate? The confident person that was like, oh, I was taking photos, they're not any better than the person that wasn't taking photos, but because of that extra confidence, people will put more weight on what they're saying. Like, oh, yeah, they have a good memory. They remember really, really well, even though they're no better than anyone else. So that was another kind of cross on the list. And then the final study, which is the one I went over to the UK to do, that was where I was like, okay, let's stop taking the photos. Let's looking at photos and what happens when we look at photos. Can photos change our memories? And so in that study, we were looking at the effect of Photoshop on people's memory. So if you Photoshop a photo, can you make someone believe that those Photoshop details actually occurred? And there's some really interesting research about making people believe that they had a hot air balloon ride as a child. And so you Photoshop them into a hot air balloon, you show them the photo and say, hey, look, this is you as a child. Do you remember this? And they're like, no, I have no memory of that. That never happened. And then you're like, okay, well, come back in a week's time. Hey, here's a photo of you in a hot air balloon. Oh, yeah, I have a vague memory of that, maybe. And then over a couple of sessions, eventually like, yeah, no, I remember it. And I was with this person and I remember eating a hot dog before going into it, and I smelled popcorn in the air, and it was really scary up in the balloon. Like, wow. You never experienced this. This is all your own generation of imagination that's become a memory. And so that's the awesome research that we were doing, and I wanted to know, how bad does that Photoshop have to get before we stop believing it? And it doesn't matter. Even the worst possible Photoshop of a news headline can make you slightly increase your memory. There aren't massive effects, but we were only doing it over the course of a month. But we were leading people to believe that. Oh, trying to think of the news headlines now. But yeah, just news headlines that were trying to like the Statue of Liberty being covered in red paint by protesters, and we were doing this with American participants that lived in New York as well.
Yeah.
And so they're like, yeah, no, I remember seeing that on the news, and so I'm like, I showed you this awfully photoshopped photo, and you're still believing it. That shows that our memory is really bad.
Yeah. But it's so scary, right? How you can manipulate the mind. That's manipulation galore.
Yeah.
Wow, what fascinating research. It reminds me of something I read in I don't know if you've read Will Smith's book. And in Will Smith's book, he talks about how he was so afraid of swimming, like so afraid of swimming and when he was a child, he thought he was going to drown, and he had all these crazy images of him drowning, and his mom saved him, and when he was in the pool, and he had this vivid memory. And all through his adult life, he was like, no, I can't swim because I'm going to die. I'm going to die. And then one day his mom goes, hey, that didn't happen. You've never been in a pool in your life. What are you talking about? And it's like, what the actual, how did that happen? And it's so crazy how the brain just does that. So I'm sure your research is, is a gateway to lots of other exciting research later on, which is pretty cool. So you finish your research, which is pretty cool. And then you're like, oh, I need to find a job, which is always the case, right? Because, it's really quite funny. This is, like they always say, when you cross one mountain, there's another mountain that you've got to cross. So you finish your undergrad, you go, cool, doing honors, you go, cool, doing your PhD, you go, cool. They're like, oh, but I still got to find a job now. This is cool. And what is that like for you? Because you've done all these cool things here, and now you've got to actually apply for a real job, quote unquote.
Yeah, that was it was difficult. I remember at the start of my PhD, thinking, after my PhD, I'll go into academia, I'll become a lecturer, a researcher, and I mean it's not off the cards. I'd have to publish first to get that, just to be able to do that. But at the end of my PhD, I was like, okay, what have I actually enjoyed doing the most over my time at university and before? And the thing I liked most was communicating. It was communicating science, communicating ideas and teaching. And so I was like, okay, well, science communication literally has science and communication in the name.
Right there, yeah.
I'll apply for a job there. And so I was like, yeah, what kind of science communication jobs are there? And then I was looking online, and one came up on Seek saying, science communicator position at Otago Museum. It's like, cool. No, that sounds exactly up my alley. It's right across the road. Otago Museum is literally like across the road from the university. So I wasn't moving too far. I applied for that, and they were like, yeah, we like what you do. And that I was able to kind of talk about all the experiences that all those opportunities I'd taken up, and doing a 3-minute thesis, that's like the ultimate science communication, because you have to synthesize all of the 300-page thesis into a very small amount of time. And so I started at the museum, and very quickly realized that there was a whole bunch of science that I just didn't know about. I mean, we talked about how I avoid neuroscience in the workings of the brain, and that's probably a case of me avoiding biology at high school, because it was too much for me. I was also doing chemistry and physics, but so there's entire areas of knowledge that I just have no idea about, and that was a kind of a challenge starting at the museum. Like, okay, now I have to work out what is a microbe, what is what does a plant, what does the plant do, photosynthesis, all that stuff that I just hadn't really experienced before.
Oh wow. And like you said earlier on, how paradoxical, you were going to the museum to do your research, and now you're working in the museum. You were avoiding this neuroscience, and now you have to learn the neuroscience. It's crazy how life does that, right? So to our listeners, I'm sure everyone's got experiences of where you try to avoid stuff, and at some stage in life, it's going to come back and go, hey, you got to learn this, or you got to cross this bridge. But also, opportunities will arise along the way there. So you've done that, which is pretty cool, and you've done a really awesome video which captured your year, which I think is a fascinating video. And if you don't mind, we probably will share it in the links when we
Yeah,
do
do
our
it.
when we do our podcast, because I think it's a great summary of what a year is like. But obviously, there's a lot that goes on behind that. And this is interesting because if you think back to your time at school, in fact, a lot of young people, there's no such career pathway called science communicator. There's nothing that didn't exist, right? But you found your passions along the way, and now you've found a niche for you that you're enjoying at this point in time. And you and I both know that this is fluid. Life is fluid. In a year's time, we might have a chat. You might be doing something else. And I think that's key. That's key to remember, that you are fluid. I mean, life is fluid. There's no single career pathway in the world of opportunities, unless you want to be an accountant. I'm just kidding. just kidding. Just kidding. And here's another thing that's really interesting for me is you left Hamilton. You've now been in Dunedin for how many years?
This is my 12th year in Dunedin.
Your 12th year. When you left Hamilton, if someone said to you, you were going and you're probably going to end up living in Dunedin for a long, long time, what would you and your family have said at that point in time? Given that Dunedin wasn't even one of your first choices, was just a place that you're like, okay, cool, let me go give it a crack.
Yeah. I'd say I don't like change. That's another paradoxical thing about myself, is that although I'm doing a lot of changing, it's quite fluid. I move through all this different stuff. I don't like changing things. And it took a bit of kind of push to get me to be like, okay, high school's done. Now my life is changing. And I guess I kind of packed in as much stuff in one change as I could.
Yeah.
So moving as far away from Hamilton as I could within New Zealand, and changing kind of my way of approaching people and things. And I guess once I got here, I was like, okay, that's me done. I don't want to change anymore. I don't think I really thought about leaving Dunedin. And that was one of the things I really struggled with, was that a lot of the people in first and second year, they're all like, oh yeah, I'm here at Otago University, and I'm going to go back home afterwards. I was like, why? Why would you go back home? That's going backwards in life. And I fully understand that that's not the case. And there's completely valid reasons to go back home, and like being part of your community that you've left behind, and taking back what you've learned to that community. But for me, it was really a case of, well, I was shocked at the end of third year when everyone just left. I was like, I have to make new friends now. Where's everyone gone?
I've got to change my peer group, damn it.
Yeah. But yeah, so I just continued. And I very much like Dunedin. I like the cold. It's lovely down here, even though it's quite a hot day today and I'm sweating because it's so hot. But
paradox, right? Paradox.
So coming down to Dunedin, I don't think I planned on moving out of Dunedin, and I'll probably stay here for a good time longer until the next massive change in my life. In which case, I'll.
And who knows that will be? That could be in a year's time, Andrew. We might call you like, actually, I'm elsewhere. Yeah, but who knows? Who knows, right?
Yeah.
And Tane, let's talk about change as well. Change. You're experiencing lots of change at the moment in your world, in terms of how the COVID situation is happening. How are you finding that? Because again, I know you like structure. I know structure is part of your life as well. So how has that been for you?
I think it's definitely been a struggle to change, but you just have to, I guess, linking back to perspective, you have to look at it as it's positive change, and sometimes it's going to be difficult. Sometimes you are going to struggle, but also finding small things that you can control. So I can't control the current climate in terms of what our COVID cases are like or anything like that, but I can structure my learning. I can structure what I do in my days to a certain extent. And so it's trying to find that balance between having some structure in your life, but also being fluid and adaptable, so that if something does come along, you're not suddenly shocked by what's happening and overwhelmed. You're willing to adapt and overcome those challenges.
Yeah, that's very true. But hey, it is hard. You have to embrace that it is hard and it doesn't happen overnight. Change is crazy. Andrew, here's a question for you. In all your 12 years in Dunedin, what is the most shocking thing that has happened to you? It doesn't have to be bad or good, just something like, what the actual...
Shocking.
Yeah.
Oh, it's putting me on the spot. I feel like I'm being tested.
Yeah. What's your memory like? There we go.
Oh yeah, it's not great, and I can tell you that. I don't know. I I can't think of anything that
Well,
stands out.
I guess I'll rephrase that. The most disruptive thing for you. The most disruptive. Yeah.
Disruptive. Hmm. I'd say, I mean, second year. So second year was the year that I took on the presidency role at St. Margaret's, and um, working out that actually being a leader and running working with a team of people is it's a shock to the system, definitely, and realizing that it's actually not possible for everyone to like you, and for all of the decisions that you make for those to be um, all rounded liked by everybody.
Yeah.
So that was a difficult time where I was learning management techniques and trying to keep on top of my work in terms of university stuff, trying to hold on to friendships, and then the kind of the way that relationships change is after first year, where everyone's trying to find their feet in first year, and then second year, you're like everyone kind of diverts off in the different pathways that they're probably going to continue on for a while, and there were lots of relationships things going on, and it was all a bit of a mess. I enjoyed second year, but it was a shock to the system. Yeah.
And when you think back, it's like a privilege because a lot of people live their lives thinking that they need to live a life where everybody likes them. A lot of people live that, and something happens for them to change. Oh, damn it! And for that to happen to you pretty early on is a blessing in disguise. That actually I can make decisions and be okay with it, even if everyone else is not happy about it. And I think that's a universal learning for everybody. Not everyone's going to like you, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And,
It's hard. I struggle with it still.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a tough one, and also you don't have to like everybody as well. It goes both ways. And it is a tough one because we're so wired as humans to want to be liked.
Yes, yeah, and I think there's a kind of a case for like I try to be likable. I try not to actively like annoy people, and it's working out that there's a boundary to that. That it's no matter how nice and friendly I am to people, there's always going to be issues, and that's okay. Everyone has a different way, a different perspective on life.
That's right, and that's okay. That's all good. Andrew, you've given us some amazing stories and anecdotes today, and I'm sure we've just summarized your last few years in about an hour or so, and there's a lot more stories. But as you know, our podcast is called Bosses of Knowledge, and what we like to do with our guests is before we end, is there any bit of knowledge that you have learned through your experiences that you'd like to share to our listeners? And this could be anything. It doesn't have to be educational. It can just be anything that you think is something that you would love to share.
In the last week, I got a barbecue. And I learned that you should always season your barbecue. And that's a really important life lesson. Season your barbecue. That makes things not stick. And I was like, I wonder if that's some kind of metaphor. Is there taking opportunities to make things not stick in the future? I feel like that's something that there's so many different things that I've been like, there's a bit of software that I've always wanted to learn how to model 3D models software. 3D model stuff. Okay, so a couple of weeks ago, I just picked up a program and was like, okay, I'm just going to teach myself this. It's not going to be relevant at all in what I'm doing right now, but later on, it might be useful. And that's kind of been the case for lots of different things, like the 3-minute thesis competition. Like that's just been an experience of science communication that I use later on. So that seasoning things early before you need them. It's a loose metaphor. I don't know if it's the greatest advice, but season your barbecue. That's my advice.
I like it. Season your barbecue because you never know when it's going to be a sunny day, right? Yeah. So because that could be used in so many different contexts. I like that. Season your barbecue, everyone, because you never know when you're going to use it. And I think that's a fantastic way to end our podcast. It is Sunday here in New Zealand. We're doing this podcast. Thank you so much, Andrew, for jumping on today. Hopefully you found this really interesting. Tane, any last words from you?
No, just thank you for coming on, Andrew. It's been a pleasure to listen to your journey and where you've got to, and also talking about a science communicator, because I think a lot of us, when we think of science, we think of being in the lab and doing the science work, but actually being able to communicate it to the wider population, that's where we get the buy-in, and that's where we get the true value of science.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I just want to round off for our listeners by going, let's just think about this. So Andrew came to university, he was like, oh, I don't know how to study, because that was one of the things. And he finished up doing a PhD. So for anyone that's just struggling out there going, oh, I don't know how to study, it's not the end of the world. It is not the end of the world. It doesn't define who you are. Seek help, ask questions, and you have no idea what's going to come with these opportunities. And yeah, on that note, thank you everyone for listening to our podcast today. As always, feel free to share it with your friends, your colleagues, your peers. Feel free to comment. Without your listening, we wouldn't be doing what we do. So thank you very much, and take care and have a fantastic week. Bye, everybody.